Thank you, Senator O'Sullivan. Senator Ketter.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr Acting Deputy President. I too am indebted to Senator Anning for raising this issue as a matter of public importance. And I'll talk a bit about the Royal Commission, but I do think it is appropriate to make the point that it is not for us to make a running commentary on the progress of the Royal Commission. It's been hard fought for to have this Royal Commission. It's been established in circumstances which perhaps are not ideal, and perhaps if Labor had been in government, things might have been done differently in terms of the establishment of the Royal Commission. But now it is in place. It should be let to do the important work that it has before it, and I certainly wish the Commissioner well in those proceedings. So I just wanted to start off by also acknowledging your role in ensuring that the Royal Commission has come to pass, and your advocacy for this to occur, because I understand that many small business people, consumers and farmers have expressed their concerns in relation to their treatment at the hands of some of our major financial institutions, and the ethical and cultural practices within these financial institutions. A Royal Commission has been long overdue, but it's now underway. Now, I think it's important to go back to the Parliamentary Joint Committee's inquiry into the impairment of customer loans, which was referred back in 2015, and there was a report in the first half of 2016. And it was during the course of this inquiry, and I participated in that we heard a number of these horrific stories about particularly the way farmers were treated at the hands of banks at the time when they were most vulnerable, when we're experiencing drought conditions, particularly in my home state of Queensland. We saw how this played out post-GFC with the Commonwealth Bank's acquisition of Bank West and with the ANZ's acquisition of Landmark, and that the Landmark matter has come up in the Royal Commission's proceedings so far. But we did deal with the Landmark matter in the impairment of customer loans inquiry, and the committee did note back then in its report that that ANZ had, without admission of regulatory breach, admitted that they had to significantly improve the financial circumstances of some of the customers with whom they have been in dispute. So ANZ did, by implication, recognise that the extant system of checks and balances was inadequate to protect small business customers and to ensure a fair and transparent relationship with the bank. So, by and large, the Labor participants in that inquiry did support the ultimate recommendations. However, we did differ from the majority view in one major respect, and that was that we did not agree with the finding that there should not be a Royal Commission. We found that there was a persistent pattern of abuse arising from the asymmetry of power in the relationship between lender and borrower, and as I say, we did not agree that the evidence received was sufficient to conclude that there was no widespread or systemic illegal or unethical behaviour by the banks. And so we believe that there was evidence of banking misconduct that needed to be further investigated. And it was at that point that the dissenting Labor participants in that inquiry came out with our recommendation that a Royal Commission be established to examine the banking and financial sector. And what we talked about was we want to particularly look at the widespread instances of illegal and unethical behaviour within Australia's financial services industry, how Australia's financial services institutions treat their duty of care to their customers, and how the culture, ethical standards and business structures of Australian financial services institutions affect the behaviour of these institutions, whether Australia's regulators are really equipped to identify and prevent illegal and unethical behaviour. We wanted to look at comparable international experience and any other events that came up in the course of those investigations. So we were, I think, on the money then, but I note that, Mr Acting Deputy President, you had come out earlier than that, and you should rightly claim some credit for that. But the Royal Commission has continued to uncover scandals which amaze us and really are a disgrace, and which we would expect that the findings of the Royal Commission ultimately in the report will do some justice to the problems that have been highlighted, and so we can see some fundamental reform occurring. We've seen the ANZ expansion into agribusiness that's come out, where it appears that they simply weren't ready for the landmark customers, and as a result 162 farmers were forced from their land. And this is, as I say, an issue that came up in our PJC. We read in the Sydney Morning Herald on the 25th of June concerns that banks were changing loan contracts for rural customers and deeming them a financial risk even if they never missed a payment. And Senator O'Sullivan has touched on some of these covenants and the devices used by the banks to find their customers in default, even though there was no financial default occurring. They used other things such as the loan-to-value ratio or the non-provision of reports, etc. And last Friday, the Financial Review reported the heartbreaking story of the Balla Bay station owners in northwest central Queensland who were evicted from their home, which was their only livelihood, by the police at the direction of the agricultural lender Rabobank. So there are very many stories like that. Stories about rural properties being sold for half their original worth in times of drought, and I know that I certainly expressed some concerns about the behaviour of valuers, and I am concerned about the inherent conflict of interest that exists with the profession of valuers, and the problem that you have with major banks having panels of valuers and the inevitable conflicts that occur as a result of that. And I think that's an issue that warrants further scrutiny into the future. And it was because Labor listened to these stories that we're concerned about rural lending practices that we called for the Royal Commission. And regrettably it took, and I use that word regrettably because in fact it's regrettable that the Prime Minister took so long to announce the Royal Commission, but even when he did, he indicated that the decision was regrettable. Again, an instance of how out of touch the Prime Minister is with the concerns of ordinary Australians. And of course, in the whole of this process, apart from yourself, Mr Acting Deputy President, the National Party did not stand up for their constituency, and they allowed the Liberals to write the terms of reference. As I said at the outset, the terms of reference are not those which we probably would have supported, but let's just get on with the issue. There was a lack of consultation on those terms of reference, which would have been better handled if the victims were consulted as part of that. In fact, it would have been probably advisable for ASIC to be informed and have an input into those terms of reference, but that didn't happen because we know that the banks came out one morning at about 8:30 and said and wrote to indicate that they now support a Royal Commission, and was something like an hour later the Prime Minister did one of the most enormous backflips in political history to come out and actually indicate that a Royal Commission would be conducted. So we do have to have confidence in the process, and as I say, I think we can see in the daily news what's coming out of the Royal Commission, and it is definitely an eye-opener. In conclusion, Labor has led the way on financial reform, and we have led the way on the future of financial advice, which those on the other side have voted against when it comes to superannuation, payday lending laws, while our arrogant and out-of-touch Prime Minister prioritises tax cuts for the top end of town at the expense of health and education and at the expense of regional Australia. We on this side of the chamber are standing up for rural communities and the issues that they are experiencing. Labor will continue to listen to regional and rural communities.